we'll go ahead and call to order the Freetown-Lakeville Regional Finance Subcommittee. Lake Cam's here recording the meeting. Quick roll. Steve Owen, Derek.
Here.
Mitzi.
Yep.
George.
Here.
Ashley Lopes is here. Charles could not make it. He's actually out of state. And then Mr. Medeiros is also at another commitment, so he won't be here this evening. But we have the person who has all the answers, so which is good. First thing on the agenda, acceptance of minutes from October 4th. I'll entertain a motion to accept.
So moved.
Second.
I have a second. Any questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? George abstains. Motion passes. All right. Old business, FY18 E&D closing update.
So we are officially closed and everything has been filed with the state. It was due October 31st and now we're just waiting for the review. I've included in your packet just the same information. There was $29,000 of surplus in the general fund that enrolled into E&D, and the breakdown of the E&D calculation. We submitted $218,000 to be reviewed and certified.
And just to clarify, this is nothing new than what we presented the last time,
Nothing
correct? Okay. Any questions? Hearing none, we're going to. Part of that, I'll just have a brief discussion. We've talked about this before. Is for a floor ceiling related to E&D, as far as what's in there. I didn't know if we wanted to start that conversation or wait till we have the Freetown participants with us for this. But I'll open up to anybody that wanted to chime in on that.
So, I mean, we have a ceiling.
We
set
do
by
have, well,
statute.
we have a cap, right? So from a
Right.
standpoint of anything over 5% has to be applied back to. And think about this, I hate to use the notion of what are we comfortable with, because that could change month to month, year to year aspect of it. So one thought that I had, at least to start the conversation, is if we looked at a combined E&D, and I know the last meeting we talked about bringing forth the Special Ed Stabilization Fund, if a combined, so right now, obviously 5% is about 1.9 of a roughly $38 million budget. That's 38 where we're at, right? 3% is under a 1.2 combined, and I just wanted to put the thoughts out there about having a discussion about, we're not going to solve that in year one, but as far as a goal of a 3% threshold between the two accounts. Now, what the makeup of that's where I'd get some feedback from the administration, but I wanted to at least start the conversation. And I don't think it's going to be a finished conversation, but I wanted to get the thought process from different folks.
Yeah, so the max in the special education is 2%. So that's roughly, what are you looking at? We're at 39 million. So like 800, 700 something thousand is the max you can have in the special ed account. So just say 700 just for ease. So I guess what I would say is if you really look at what you would need E&D for, I think it's important to kind of say, because when 86% or 85% of what you have as budget is made up of salaries and wages, the likelihood that you need more is only generally related to E&D as an emergency type thing during the year. So we're only really looking at a smaller piece of the budget, I guess I would say. I'm not looking at it from a percentage of a smaller piece of the budget, but just trying to say, you know, what could E&D be used for? I think that's really the question. What do you think would be the anticipated uses of E&D? You know, and maybe we have that conversation. certainly special ed, we've used it for. I think if there's capital,
Yeah, and what we talked about briefly at the last meeting, the way the budget was managed was at a macro level. And correct me if I'm wrong, Ashley, we're sort of changing that to bring that down a step or two, to sort of manage it at a department level so we can see, right? So even one representative from the town has said we do a great job of managing the budget as a whole, right? So where is it that we would have had to pull into E&D, but we sort of stopped things on certain budgets in that aspect? And that's why I think the word I'm looking for, the Ashley bringing to the table that oversight to keep that in mind with each of the department heads. So,
I think the major item is absolutely special ed, but this year legal costs exceeded what we had budgeted for. So there was contract negotiations, there were some issues with, I think, a student that we had to have some legal representation with. So I know for certain that our legal costs were over our anticipated budget, and that's where, going to Steve's point, that's where we managed at a macro level, but we pulled from here to fund that because we might have had it somewhere else. It'd be nice to know what things were like that, so we could have an understanding of what actually was over and where other things were under. I think the other thing that may have some susceptibility would be dependent on how you budget the utilities. That, depending on the weather that we get, I think that certainly would be an item that could have some exposure, but I don't think none of it has the exposure that special ed does. I think we all know that, we've seen that. So I don't have an issue with, I mean, if you read the auditor's letter, the auditor's letter said pretty much E&D would be used for items like that special ed. He mentioned special ed in the letter.
Would he
So
give like a recommendation with the?
he did,
Was
he
that-
did, and we didn't get that here. That's going to the committee. But I think I would like to see us look at his recommendation from a, he had something like 3 months worth of, 2 months worth of rolling expenditures as some type of guideline. He couldn't give a recommendation because of the nature of his relationship with his district. He couldn't give a number, but he gave some guidance around it. And I think there was 2 months of operating expenditures as a minimum. So what those may be would be interesting to see.
Non-salaries, right?
No, I think he meant
It's pretty-
operating.
So I mean, that's
It's-
what, 2 months of the budget? I mean, that's
So
greater than
Exactly.
5%.
Right, so, but again, it would give us, it's greater than 5%, but my point was, he wasn't using that to intermingle with a special ed fund, he was calling it all as a reserve fund or E&D, so he wasn't differentiating, hey, a special ed revolving fund could be handled here, a lot of
Yeah.
districts are handling it through E&D, did I interpret that correctly?
He was noting it specifically for E&D.
For E&D.
For special
I mean,
ed
special
costs.
ed.
And types of items that would come out of that.
Yeah.
And special ed is, an
No.
expenditure that's always volatile for every district, so that's a lot of the time people will go to E&D for that. However, in our district, being here for a few months, we've seen a lot of maintenance costs that are coming up, things that are starting to fail that we need to repair, and if they weren't budgeted, we weren't looking out, which we are doing, we would dip into E&D for something like that. Same thing with utilities. I mean, everyone's projecting a 20% increase in oil prices. We budgeted last year on what we knew then, opposed to what's going to be happening going forward. So those are all the things that, from my point of view, we would be.
So you're really saying for the one time, those are really the initial hit of your recurring operating budget items. It's really, because then it needs to be in your operating budget, because it's
Right.
not sustainable to have
Right.
E&D as part of your
absolutely.
operating budget.
Oh, absolutely.
So those are the things that you're really looking at and saying, like, what could be the max exposure
Right.
this year because of a giant blizzard, a snowstorm, or
Right.
something? And I think, you're never going to obviously be able to quantify it, but you can start to see it by the monitoring that you're doing now, because you're here, you're going to be consistently here to kind of see if you're
Right.
monitoring in departments. But I know that, like in the town, we just created a maintenance budget that we just funded in, one larger line item for those types of things,
Right.
where then it was, kind of district-wide, because we had the ability to put that into the budget, in any given year, so that we didn't fall into disrepair with some of these items. And I think that went in as
You didn't
like-
have a maintenance budget?
It was in every other department.
Right, like
which-
DPW had its own maintenance budget?
Yeah, so
or
we
something?
kind of took them all and put them in one so you could monitor it, because that allowed for like, okay, otherwise you looked at the budgets and sometimes like you'd have the library would spend all their maintenance budget because they didn't really need it.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
it
yeah.
allowed you to kind of manage what really needed it during the year, as opposed to, well, it's in my, AES maintenance budget, so of course I'm gonna spend it, even though the need won't be as great as it was at Gray's to get these things done. So you ended up kind of playing that,
What's-
movement game in the departments too.
What's the issue, or, I mean, obviously, I know you've raised on several occasions the stabilization, and so hasn't Steve. So it's, and I know the superintendent did as well in the whole budget presentation. What's the need for that mechanism rather than E&D?
You mean for the special ed
Yeah.
stabilization?
What's the need to create something and go through that process rather than just use E&D as the mechanism
I mean, I
in the
suppose
same manner?
you could, except for, when I look at it, if that's the major component of the needs for E&D, I'd rather see it separated, I think, only from the purpose of accountability. And also, if you put money in, it's earmarked for special education. So it's kind of supposed to streamline the whole thing, so that if you're really kind of choosing, what's my priority or what am I going to use E&D for, you have this set aside special ed that you've committed to those costs, because again, one kid coming into the district or one kid leaving the district could allow you to have this swing. But if I have an opportunity where, there's a couple kids that age out of the district and now you've got more money available, I'd rather see it set aside for the next year when we're going to have kids move into the district, so that it doesn't get put into the operating budget for something else. It's almost like running a separate budget. It's only from, the perspective that the towns can also transfer in there specifically. So it allows for another mechanism other than what we kind of ended up doing last year, is we're going to put this extra,
120.
line item in there,
125,
to have it go through, but it's not even there until next year.
Yeah, from the account, I get that, because that's a little bit, we had to get to the 125, we did it, and there isn't a clear isolation of it. That we're tracking it and we're watching it, but there isn't something that just says, here's the revolving account. It's somewhere, it's in the, where did we end up putting that 125?
It's in special education.
Special ed, okay.
And it's still there, right?
The monitor's 125.
Just want to make sure.
But I think, I disagree a little bit on the accountability side, only because E&D is totally accountable. We have to account for E&D.
I think what I mean is, for towns to come forward and say, look, the operating budget goes up year after year after year after year after year. Like, what are you using it for?
Yeah, I get
Oh,
that.
it's floating into E&D magically every year. Your E&D is $1 million. Ooh, you took money out, you put it back in, you had a budget shortfall here, blah, blah, blah. You can get to the details of what's in there, but if you have the ability to go forward and transfer $100,000 from Freetown and $100,000 from Lakeville into a special education fund, a revolving fund. No, I did that again, it's a stabilization fund. So if we transfer it into that fund, the townspeople understand what's happening at town meeting, as opposed to, you need an extra $200,000 in your budget, where people go, oh man, like this just keeps going up and up and up, and it allows for you then, the problem that I would think from the school district side, if I was sitting on that table, would be, I don't want to have to go back to the towns to authorize me to use the money that's been set aside for this. However, I think you kind of have to be really.
See, I'd rather do it that way, but I'd rather go in front of town meeting to do it.
But
I'd rather- 'cause-
you're doing it once. I mean, here's the thing, if you want money from the towns in the middle of the year, that's a bad thing. And both towns have to call town meeting.
Oh, yeah, it
They
is.
have to now do this.
Oh,
I'd
it is.
rather have a transfer every year, if that's the case, at town meeting that says,
But-
here's $100,000, here's $100,000, okay, now we get 200. Next year, here's $100,000, here's $100,000. Now, you don't have to come before a town meeting to say, hey, we need $400,000. It's already been budgeted for, and it's sitting in your stabilization.
I don't necessarily disagree with that. Let me play devil's advocate on the other side a little bit, because I can actually see that working and I have no problem with it, as long as the school committee didn't go down the road of using E&D again for supplementing its operating budget. Because if it did, we'd run into a situation where, hey, we needed that money and it's sitting over here and we can't use it. That's a problem. So I have to look, I'm thinking also along the lines of, everybody around this table won't be here or may not be sitting in the same capacity 10 years from now or 15 years from now.
God, I hope not.
Well, right. So I'm trying to think in terms of, we know what we face with now in the past. What is the future going to look like? And I don't want to see another school committee go down the road. Hey, I was on the committee when we spent down that E&D money. I was not really for it, but I don't want to see that happen again. So I'd rather, in some instances, if we did have that restricted, it may not allow that to happen. But let me go back to the whole process, the middle of town. No, we wouldn't want to go, absolutely agree. We don't want to go in the middle of the year. First of all, if we have a E&D in the middle of the year like that, we got a problem in our district where we've done something wrong. I can't imagine all those people moving in at once. But the way I see it is a little differently. If we had an appropriate level of E&D, right, we got to the middle of the year, the committee could at least fund that and go back to the towns and say, hey, this is what we took out of E&D the middle of the year. Worst case scenario, I don't see this happening, but middle of the year, say something happens. That money gets spent, it gets accounted for, and then it goes in front of town meeting and say, folks, we have to spend at the next town meeting 500 rather than calling a special town meeting.
Yeah, here's my theory on that. You're never getting that money. Now you're coming to the towns next year because it's the budget season, and you're saying, hey, we have to use our E&D, we have to do this. Now they're looking at it and saying, okay, so you're asking for $1.4 million more on the operating budget to refeed my E&D. It's going to take another year to flow it back through. I'd rather
It's the same way as going through a revolving fund, though.
not, though, because
How
we
is it
can
not?
transfer that at any town meeting and build up. It's like
Even at the special town meeting?
yeah, I mean, not this one anymore, it's too
No,
late.
no, no,
Right.
no,
But, you know, if you look at it and you say, look, in the fall, you know, if both towns say, hey, here's 50 grand, okay, great, it's going into the stabilization fund, or 100 grand, you know, and then you get to the annual and towns go, okay, you want another 100 grand, okay, you start building it up that way. You start adding things into the operating budget and everyone goes, no way. And
Yeah.
like, I mean, that's just political, like,
Yeah, but
you try to sell that at
there is
town
really
meeting?
no difference, though, because if we had to chunk out, what we're talking about is, I'm saying if we had this real middle of the year, like worst case scenario, let's look at it very pessimistically. Worst case scenario, I had the E&D, I funded it, I went to town meeting and say, yeah, I don't think that's gonna work. Town meeting comes, if we have a revolving stabilization fund, we're gonna end up taking all that, drawing that down and saying, we need to refund it again. Same ask is gonna go to the towns,
No, because you come to the board of selectmen in each town and say, I need this.
but we're gonna need to replenish that fund.
Town meeting can understand that better. I'm saying it, I believe from the political side, that the best way to get that stabilization that you're looking for is 2 separate articles, because I really don't think that putting it into the operating budget is going to be something that will be sustainable.
Okay, then what?
From a funding perspective, from
Yeah, I'm
the
hearing you
majority
out.
of the
No, I'm hearing
taxpayers.
you out. I'm understanding, I'm trying to debate this a little
Yeah.
bit, because I wonder if we created, like we used to do in Freetown years ago, where the budget, they created they voted on a special ed budget, and they voted on the regular ed budget. You'd still be having you could fund it that way.
Yeah, but I don't know, I think that just from my perspective of putting budgets forward at town meeting and the understanding of budgets by the people voting on them at town meeting is, I can understand in a little more, you know, I don't want to say simplistic manner, because the budget includes so many different aspects, that if the operating budget is the operating budget, which includes your special ed costs, which are going to go up every year in theory, right? So say they go
Yeah.
up $400,000 and all of a sudden you look at the operating budget and you go, all right, we're going to have to ask the towns for another 400 grand. You know, so, but you're explaining that anyways right now through the process. This other mechanism is, you know, in the middle of the year or something happens and guess what? The towns can't afford, or they don't want to afford another $100,000 each, but you've got now this kitty over here, you know, it's a known triggering event to say, look, guys, we had to go and dip into this. be prepared that we need more money in the operating budget for next year.
I understand,
just-
and I,
like-
we could go round and round on that, and I have no, I understand where you're coming from. I think it's one and the same to me, and quite frankly, whether, there is that separate fund over there, but if we have to use it, we still have to find a way to replenish it, we still have to have that same ask. It doesn't change the ask.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
you're right, I think this is something that we can go pros and cons with, right, as far as which way. I guess, two questions as far as, one, which is cleaner, right, that I would defer to the finance side of it, which is cleaner in that aspect of it, and two, the funding question, right? That to me is a big thing, and that's
I
where-
agree. No, I
right?
agree.
And
That's
I
big
think that the funding piece, again, not to use the word the same word, cleaner, with that if I can go back twice a year to figure out a funding mechanism for this, a replenishing mechanism, whatever the word we're looking for, that's where that comes into.
With that, sorry, Mitzi,
Yep.
with that, I think we need to understand what our minimum E and D needs to be, though. Like, there needs to be some minimal level of E and D before we get into that discussion of how we fund it, because to Mitzi's point a little bit, it's gonna be easier maybe from what she's telling me, a little easier for the towns to fund that revolving stabilization fund. What happens when we have incidentals that tend to add up and we keep drawing on E and D to fund those incidentals? The E and D is never gonna get replenished.
So the very valid point, and this is how it was done in the past, and I think Ashley's done a good job of, this is how we're trying to do things in the future, right? The towns have a valid point to sit there and say, in the past 5 years, what have we taken out of E&D, right? Which is kind of, while it's a valid question, we've just done a different job of managing the budget, so
Yeah, I get it.
we've had services that we didn't take care of. We borrow from Peter to pay Paul, right, essentially. That is changing, correct me if I'm wrong, right? So I think that'll give us a much clearer picture as we go forward, right? And this is where when I first said about E and D, what are we comfortable with? We may be comfortable a number today,
Yeah, I
right?
agree.
It definitely wasn't $80,000.
No,
which is
right,
what we were
no
thinking
doubt about
about.
that, right.
A number that we're clear with today, maybe a much different number come next June as far as what everything that's going on.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to have this conversation, but seeing where we may be ending up with E and D, I think this conversation is, to Mitzi's point, to have it now is a good
Well, and
suggestion.
a lot of stuff too, I mean, when we went back and looked at, and I'm trying to think exactly what, I think it was for the friendly lawsuit. I'm trying to think exactly when it was or why, but went through to look at exactly what might have been for the debt piece, but what the estimates of state aid were and what the actuals were that came in. So we could determine exactly, I think it might have actually been an analysis of E&D. So we asked for all that information of what state aid was supposed to be, that we all went through on the assessment sheet, because even though they come through on the cherry sheet, sometimes it's different regardless of what you get anyway. So
Yep.
you had a couple years where you got another $128,000 on transportation.
Transportation, right.
That wasn't on the cherry sheet, and then the next year you were short like $30,000, on transportation for some bizarre reason. So there's things that happen to those cherry sheet numbers too. And so what we were doing is just kind of going through it and saying, okay, here's a state aid that was kind of somewhat promised in theory. And we always cut it off as of, whether it's mid-April, essentially of like, we're done with this because we don't need to go through every iteration of the governor's budget in the state and the House and the Senate and all that stuff. But we kind of put a freeze on state aid. And what is great, and what you really can see on here, is really the reason why E&D is being jacked up so much is because those estimates originally that we budgeted on for the assessments, the state came in later with a supplemental budget or whatnot, and now with additional funding into those accounts. So I think that that's a good thing to see, and I like that practice, I think, for the most part. I don't think we've seen in the past, really 5 years, I guess, that I've been working on this, I don't think we've seen a reduction other than when we jumped to like the Senate number on transportation reimbursement that then dropped below where we were.
Yeah.
So most of the time it's a little bit more. So I think there's always going to be something I guess what I'm trying to say is when we go through the budget process and we do the assessments, that's also a way by which, and I'm not gonna count on it, but that we fund E&D, is stopping, looking at the numbers and saying, look.
Hence
if
where
this
we
is-
are.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. And so I don't wanna doubly burden, I'd rather see I guess what I'm trying to say, I'd rather see the state throw the money into E&D than the towns.
Let me ask you this question.
I know it's semantics.
Yeah, no, I hear what you're saying. George, do you have,
I'm just listening.
okay.
I agree with that statement. I'd rather see the state do it too, because quite frankly, from a school perspective, I don't think the state's come up with a lot of things that they require us to do and fund them appropriately.
Well,
Quite frankly, I think they've actually instituted a lot of things that, to the cost of the
Right,
district.
exactly.
So-
But I also
So-
don't want to give credit to the state because really they're not funding it.
Exactly.
Right,
You
no,
know what
I-
I mean?
I
But like,
understand.
but what I mean is if the towns agree on a number, and we're okay with this now on the town side, that anything the state gives us is just extra, that's coming in because we didn't plan on it in the first place. And I think that was the big first shocker when we looked to see, when we've got the increase and it's like, all right, we have three, in theory, somewhat equal players coming to the table with money, and we know who's the cheapest. It's not either of the towns.
Yeah, and.
Or the district.
Unfortunately,
Yeah.
when you go back on that whole, look back, Mitzi, on this, when you go back to regionalization, there was a big promise on transportation that never was fulfilled. So you're looking at that 120 now, I'm looking back at all those years of, hey, we should have been getting that money back then and we weren't.
Right.
So, but I hear your point. It's a tough scenario,
So-
and believe me, I like the fact that this year or next year could potentially be that way. But we gotta toe the line. As a school committee, we gotta toe the line on that. Steve knows that, Ashley knows that. Hey, that's what we're expecting, that's what we still expect. It's
Yeah.
not like,
Right, but I think, what I'm saying is, trying to put a large amount of additional into the budget for the hopes that it'll fall through to E&D again
Yeah, it's
is a
not-
little less,
Yeah.
like, it's nice to look at it and say, okay, good, the state kicked in, because otherwise, again, we get into the sustainability of the operational side on the towns. Now, fortunately, I think, because we're in a pretty good economy, both towns, I think, are doing a little bit better. But when I look at the stabilization option is, again, when I look at what do we have in free cash, so where did we get unanticipated funds or revenues higher than where we were? And I look at that and say, that's the opportunity where I would say, transfer to stabilization. I won't say, add to your operating budget.
No, and I know what you mean by that, I wouldn't like the fact either that, hey, the operating budget continues to climb without any explanation because, expenses happen, I get that, or we spent it, or someone spent it, we didn't feel it was in the budget before, and now it's a line item that it got added to for the next budget season,
Right.
I get that. I'm hoping, and I agree with Steve, that, there's more clarity to that picture as we go forward, and that, some of that stuff will be a little better explained.
So let me, because as I said, we can go around and let me try and ask this question a little bit more direct. So if we fast forward the next year and knowing that a lot of variables will change, as you see in our packet, we're expecting, but we're looking at a 700K number for E&D, right? I know from a school committee perspective, and I don't want to speak for Derek, this is where I'd rather have it be, not where we were. Are the towns concerned with the E&D at that level?
Meaning, like, am I afraid that 732 is too high?
Correct.
No.
Okay.
I mean, not my perspective. I mean, I.
No, and that's why.
That's why I said and I like the fact that in theory, it's the state coming forward, because the
Yeah, okay.
towns came forward and said, this is what we can afford.
Can I ask
And we're
that-
giving that extra 125, and then the
Yeah.
state comes in and goes, guess what? Here's an extra 500, and we all go, thank God.
Yeah.
Well, and had we known that before, we wouldn't have the 125. We wouldn't have the 125,
Well, I mean, it wasn't a surprise that we knew that those numbers had changed,
But I don't think we knew
didn't
the-
know-
the
we didn't know
magnitude.
exact
degree,
Because
right,
it
to the
came out in
degree.
July, I
Yeah.
mean, at that point, but we knew going up to town meeting that it was, hey, these numbers are looking better, and we know we're gonna have more in there. But I think, to that point, clearly it means the towns both believe that 80 is way too low. you know, and that's kind of the thing to look at and say, obviously, that wasn't where anyone wanted to be. We didn't want you in that position.
No, and I agree, I don't think anyone would want us there, but I said the same token, you didn't wanna go broke trying to help that situation, I get that, you know?
Yeah, because we have, you know, again, we
Yeah.
have to balance the entirety.
Right,
of
I get
the
that.
operating budget.
Let me ask you this question, do you feel, based on anticipated, to Steve's point, well, that at $700,000, is it your opinion that a stabilization fund should now be funded because E&D is at a level that you,
I mean, yeah, I mean, I think that I still would like to see the stabilization fund. I mean, I'd be happy if the total was, you know, again, not knowing what you'd even need to take out of E&D other than right now still would be special ed costs.
for the major piece,
You
yeah.
know, I think that if we build towards, maybe you build towards the 1.2, you build towards somewhere between 1 and 1.2. I think that's a reasonable, probably 1.2, to try to get there. And if that's a time period that you're looking at of saying, you know, is it going to be a year or two, you know, you kind of, 3 years, you know, you kind of look at that and say, how are we going to get there?
And I think that's actually, that's the number I had,
1, 2?
yeah,
Yeah,
that's
I
the number I
As a
thought in mind.
combined.
Yes, and how we do that and combine it, but that's the number I had in my
Yeah,
mind.
because,
So let me ask you this question. I'm sorry.
No,
Derek.
I'm just,
Okay.
did you just call him Derek?
I did.
like
I'm
Derek
really sorry for
multiplied.
doing
That's, that, I would be insulted if I were
it. Thanks for calling me out on it.
You're welcome. That's what I do.
Wow, I've lost track now. Sorry, I really am.
that's not offensive.
So, and I think we've heard from you and you, George. What's your thought process on that 1-2 range combined in a?
I mean, for me, if we're just looking at floor and ceiling, I'm fine having a ceiling and no floor, just, that's my opinion.
Well, and I hear that we do have a law,
And
a legal
I
aspect
know
of
that,
it.
and that is essentially, so we don't need to create it, so I understand that.
Yeah, we're just looking for a number that we can work towards, right? That, and again, it's not gonna be the same every year, but I think it's more the fact of, it's not gonna be all solved here, but hey, let's have a goal that we want to have between E&D and if ultimately the school committee goes with the stabilization fund, that 1-2, I wanna make sure that we have consensus from this body that we recommend to the full school committee that this is the direction we wanna go.
Yeah.
Right, so, and that's why I was asking your opinion on that aspect of
And
it, so.
George, you said you don't, no floor, you wouldn't be concerned that we're going too low in any of those
Well, I think
as a
that,
finance?
well, I guess the concern is, you know, first of all, funding it, you know, so we're always gonna be tied to making sure that it's funded. And then the other concern is what if we have to dip below the floor? So I understand that this is just a number that we're creating, but if we're gonna create these rules, or kind of like the town had created these, I guess, best practices, then, yeah, we don't wanna go, you know, create something only to say, well, we're gonna break the rule this time and go below it. So if we're gonna create it, let's create it and be serious about it, but if we need to dip below it, then what happens?
Well, I think that just sets the table for, let's fast forward here, right? We have 700 in E&D and we have 500 in the stabilization fund. I think it comes down to a point of, hey, listen, we had to go into E&D for the tune of, let's cup up a number, $300,000 here. And that's where I think this body comes into the fact of saying, all right, what do we need to do to replenish that aspect of it, you know, to get that back up to a number that we're, again, I hate to use the word comfortable with because it's gonna change.
And I think that conversation needs to be, okay, is there anything in the school budget as well that may be able to be pulled back? So I just want to make sure that if we've got 3 players, really,
Yep.
on the table, the state, again, isn't a player, you know, but it's one of those things where I think in the past, it's always been, well, let's look to the towns. And I just want to make sure that all 3 bodies are looking to say, what can we do?
And I
Now,
think-
I know we can raise money and you can't.
Yep.
So we have the power of taxation and you don't. So that's a huge component, but I think that it's important if it's like, look, we wanted to do these initiatives and whatnot, but we're willing to cut back on the budget, you know, 50 grand, and we're gonna hold it so it falls into E&D. That's the goodwill that the towns then, you know, can see too.
Oh.
So So I guess to sort of bring this to either a homework or assignment or next step, because I think this is something we're going to always have this conversation, right? Are we in a position to make a recommendation to the school committee to say, yes, let's set up that stabilization fund?
I think so. I mean, what I would do probably though is bring it to our next Board of Selectmen meeting and see if, I don't think anybody is gonna have a problem with creating a fund, you know?
Well, it's
the
creating it,
funding
then
of the funding,
it's a
right?
two-step process.
So,
Right,
right,
that's-
exactly. So, but, you know, just getting that out there. But again, from my role on this committee, absolutely. From my role as a member of the Board of Selectmen, I just want to make sure that it's going to have some legs.
Yeah, and for me, I'd like to know that if we're gonna go through this, then we gotta at least start some funding of it. You know, so
Kind
it
of
doesn't
do
make
that,
any sense for
yeah.
me to say, hey, let's have this let's create it and not fund it.
No,
So
I-
that's
It
where
has to be
the,
next year because at this point.
oh, no
June.
problem.
It's
Yeah,
June.
yeah, I have no problem, but at least we know that that would be the case,
But
you
we
know.
also, you know, from the funding perspective, it's looking at it now and saying, all right, you know, what do we have? I mean, I think we've got, you know, enough in stabilization where I would say, you know, at least $100,000 from Lakeville could transfer from stabilization to stabilization. And again, that's a transfer to transfer. Easy, clean, you know, here's something that's moving from here to here, or from free cash to here. You know, as we look at it, because what we do with Article 1 in this special town meeting, which is happening in 2 weeks, is we do all our transfers like that. So it's the fall is where, in the future, it would be part of the funding process. Because we get our free cash and we say, all right, look, what are we using this one-time money? Because we know when we look at how we got free cash, it's not sustainable. It's, we sold these things in tax title. We sold these things. We had these additional ambulance fees, things that aren't necessarily recurring. And so that's when we look at it and say, and that's also on here is OPEB. So when we look at it and we say, we need to fund some of these big ticket, you know, kind of capital or long-term or non-recurring items, that's what we've always looked at as the fall transfers.
Okay. Then the reason why I'm asking the question now is because the school committee has a job in the next few meetings is to provide some direction to the administration as far as building the FY20 budget, right? So this is where I think part of the discussion is more of the fact of, yes, build your budget with an assumption of we're going to create the stabilization fund and there's an initial funding component, because that's what's going to happen at the full town meeting.
It's not gonna affect their assessment though, right?
No.
It does, it's on the
Well,
assessment sheet.
it is, but it's not.
But it's not, right?
Yeah.
Right, it's kind of like debt.
Yeah.
Right.
Ish. Like, it's a separate line item, and what we'd probably do, like what we've done with debt, is although it's on the assessment sheet, we would put it in a separate article.
Right.
And then
Right.
that way, it's like, this is the operating assessment, and then we also break down the transportation assessment, the capital assessment, or
Right.
debt assessment, and then we'd have probably a completely separate article, which would be to fund the special ed stabilization.
But I
fund.
think a good strategy would be at the full town meeting, it's an initial funding. It's not we're getting everything all at
Oh,
one
yeah.
time.
Well, that's-
And then we
there's
come back
no-
to the fall as far as a strategy. And it may be a multi-year plan to get to a level that
I-
we're comfortable with.
Yeah, I would say a multi-year plan, and I'd be happy to, you know, make a motion that this committee recommend that the school committee create a special education stabilization fund. And that's as far as we can go with that recommendation. I would say, I'm also would be comfortable if you wanted to say 1.2 combined. It's not this year, so I want to make sure that everybody would
It's a
know.
goal, it's a
Yeah.
working goal.
But
Yeah,
we-
and I
we
agree,
don't-
I can't, you're not gonna get there this year, and quite frankly, where we're at, I'm thrilled where we're possibly gonna be at. Couple of things, one thing when we're having this discussion of
Wait.
E and D.
Sorry, before we get
Go
that,
ahead.
there was a motion.
Okay,
It stopped after, you know, just making a recommendation that.
Yeah, and again, this is
recommend
just
to
a
the school
recommendation,
committee.
it's not a, we're gonna do it type thing. Unfortunately, that, what we do is we make a recommendation to the full. So
Right.
the motion was to establish
Yeah.
to recommend the school committee to establish
Special
and have
Education
initial.
Stabilization Fund. I would cut it off, there's no initial funding.
can I just say, I would like Freetown to be here to see what their vote would be before we try to motion a recommendation for the school committee. They don't have anybody here. I don't think that would be a good.
You're from Freetown.
I am, and you know what, I'm inclined to agree with that, Mitzi, but I don't think it's fair that that they, and quite frankly, probably have the votes anyway, but I'd like to see what they have to say about it. I don't think there was any objection the last
Yeah.
meeting, but I want to hear them before I put it forth before the school
What's
committee.
the timeline on that? Because isn't there a timeline that it needs to
Actually,
go
like-
to be able to be established even for like the spring town meeting? Like, 'cause it has to be, it's not just a simple vote. I think then it has to go on the warrant as well.
Well, because
and
we
then
had it
needs-
last year. We
Yeah,
had
we-
we
it
had
was-
the timeframe.
Yeah, so what we need to do.
There was two warrant articles.
Yeah, so
One
we
was
need
to
to have
establish
the
a fund.
warrant would be on the special immediately prior to the annual. So
No,
that's
you
what
could have, we had both. You could have my understanding, again,
We
I
did
would
have both.
ask your opinion on this, actually, as a homework assignment. It's one article to establish, and
And
then you
then
have it
fund.
immediately following another
Yeah, to
article
fund it.
for funding.
Yeah, that's what.
It did not have to be separate meetings.
All right.
But there was some time frame we followed last year to get it on the, and we ended up pulling it.
Yeah,
We ended
yeah.
up
We
pulling
had
it
to
off.
vote it based upon the timing of the town.
The town's
having
warrant.
warrants.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
And I
so
would,
so we can wait.
I would.
Yeah, I
even-
think we got time. I
Yeah.
don't want to push
Yeah.
that, give them the opportunity, and I mean, we got plenty of time to move that
And
forward.
quite frankly, even if the initial funding was $50,000.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's just more the fact of, there's something in there, and then there's a recommendation that we can say for the fall meetings, as far as, okay, what's the multi-year plan of building that up?
Can I go, because there seems to be a little bit of two motions there. There was a 1.2 combined and then.
I'm pulling it.
So, okay.
But I think there's some
So-
agreement that, and I hear your point about having Freetown involved in that discussion, but I think there's, to wrap this up, to go on to another one, so we're not here until late, is more the fact of that the strategy is establishing the fund and the strategy of having a combined 1.2 between E and D in a multi-year plan. Is that,
I agree. I do want to back up on one thing, though. And I don't, this is not really in relation to this, but this goes back, I want to say, probably Mitzi's raised this in the past, but we have to look at some policies, some real basic policies of, so we don't hurt the integrity of what we're attempting to do. For instance, how do we fund capital projects? Because to Mitzi's point, if these things start flowing into the budget, capital projects and that nature, it's gonna create a problem on our budget. So I think we need some policies that say, this is how we're gonna fund these type of items. Or, I'm not saying to George's point, we can't tie our hands always, but I think that, quite frankly, how we funded capital projects through budgets in the past was another reason why
Yeah.
we ended up
Yeah.
using E&D.
Right,
We
you
could
had
say
no
it was all.
idea what was in there.
Right,
Yeah.
we could say it was all special ed, but you gotta remember, there was capital projects floating in there. I mean, I'd like to see that get all cleaned up, so that way, so we need some simple policies that don't hurt the integrity of what we're attempting to do with E&D
Yeah.
and the stabilization
So,
account.
What I can do, I mean, the next time, we establish policies, Finance Committee and Board of Selectmen policies for the town. And what it really did is it talked about what we wanted for target allocations in our stabilization funds. And then, when and if, and it's slightly different, but, we could take it as a model to say, look, what do you want to do for capital? So we have a capital projects debt service stabilization fund. That's what the towns can establish, so that they can put money into those funds, which then again, we do that sometimes with our free cash. So then when we say, what is our average spend that we're targeting for capital items every single year? And we say it's, $700,000, or, 6, 7, 5 to 7, whatever it is, $100,000. So we look at that and say, okay, well, what's going in there? Well, not having your capital plan in front of us at all, and not having that advocacy means that it doesn't fall into our standard procedures. So knowing what you guys are looking for and feeding it into that process, we should be meeting with you guys, just like we meet with, the
Oh, I
other
agree.
department heads on the capital plan side.
Well, that's
and saying,
coming up in
is
this
how much we
agenda.
have.
yeah.
That's
no,
coming up on this
it
agenda.
is, and I think that, I think part of our strategy, and maybe this is something that we need to get on the administration's side, is the fall meetings is where we need to have the request for transfers into the stabilization fund as well as capital.
Because what the
Right.
fall town meetings do, at least in Lakeville, is we look at, all right, this is the end of what happened last year. We now know where the funding sources came from, if we have them or not.
Mhm.
So that's, like, you can't count on it every year, because we've had years where, free cash is
No,
not
but
there.
I think that we're gonna see this, and I'm gonna quickly go to this, is more of the fact that we've asked the administration to come up with that plan by department, right? So it's not just, here's an overarching, district that this is a direction plan, so.
Yeah.
And maybe part of that strategy is with the administration of, we need to plan that the fall meetings, and we see if Freetown is on board with that, is the focus from us would be, do we need to replenish anything into the stabilization fund? And do we need to make any capital requests in that?
And make a fall capital request, yeah, I mean, we're doing a couple capital requests that we have on the agenda, so
That's not
it's-
to-
that's.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean it gets funded, like you said.
Yeah.
It
No, but
depends.
I think from that perspective, it makes everything cleaner. And it's, the school district is a department of the town too. I mean, when we look at it, that's how we look at it in terms of the budget. So to not have that information on what you're looking for, because it's kind of housed here, but it's not really, we're not putting it into what are we doing here. We're looking and waiting till the annual every year for you guys, so. And that's just because we haven't thought about it, or we haven't really talked about doing it that way. So I think if you had the policies that we come up with, where maybe we say, look, in the fall, the school district, comes up with what their needs are for, what the funding plan is to keep moving forward on the special education stabilization fund, along with their capital projects that they're looking to try to get funded, and you go to the towns in the fall, you're not gonna have a problem. The minute that you go to the towns in the spring with the annual, when every other department, and we're looking at all those budgets, it's like, well, we're looking at our operating income, and we don't have any more operating income. But in the fall is when we look at what's our one-time revenue. And that's what you're looking for, is one-time transfers. And we have no problem doing one-time to one-time, because it doesn't make,
Well, and I think this keeps the E&D less susceptible from that perspective. The more we can isolate out like that, the less chance we're gonna have to say we need to replenish E&D, because
Right.
it's gonna be funding in a correct
right, so maybe
mechanism.
this sits at 750,
Could be.
forever.
Yeah, could be.
and
So
it's-
I think this is a great start to the conversation, right? I think there's gonna be future pieces to it, but in light of, unless there's no objection, I'd like to move on in the agenda piece. This is now Ashley's favorite facilities update section.
It's brief. We have finished the upgrades to the security cameras at Freetown and at Assawamsett. I've given you a breakdown of the cost and the additional cameras. We've gotten pricing for the next phase, which would be Grays and the middle school. I've also included that pricing there and what the upgrades would be. Another thing to note, which unfortunately Freetown's not here, but the hot water boiler at Freetown Elementary was cited for repairs during their annual inspection. It's not something that we were budgeting for or were expecting. So that's something that's coming up that I'll need to reach out to Freetown and talk about.
So just a question on the security. This was just for a replacement of the upgrades of the cameras, as well as entry keys and the like?
So initially, when we were receiving the donation for Freetown Elementary, it was for the security cameras and also rekeying of all of the doors. Because we did not accept the donation, we have not rekeyed all of the doors
Got
in the
it,
building.
okay. So it's just all the security cameras and everything. And it has been completed at Assawamsett, not the
It has.
rekey, but the cameras? And
Yes.
connected with the police
police
station and everything
department,
like that?
So why didn't we accept the donation? Was it conflict of interest, or?
I'll let the school committee speak to that.
Yes, let's put it that way, short and sweet.
Okay,
And there's ongoing litigation between the company and the town.
okay,
New information came to light, and the school committee
okay.
respectfully gave back the
Executive
donation.
session speak.
It was
Gotcha.
$8,700 component,
Oh.
so.
Can I ask, oh, no, that's for school committee. I'll ask you at the school
Yeah,
committee, it's not for
so-
this meeting.
And as far as the boiler piece, this is something that we are working with Freetown as
Right.
far as the replenishment of that, or the funding of replacing the boilers.
Right, and I'll be reaching out to them. I was gonna start the conversation here
Yeah,
while we were
okay.
in session. Also included in your packet are the facilities capital plans. I also have information about technology and food service. Those are not included because they're not as finalized as the facilities portion is.
I have one question on that. This tennis courts, I see in 2020 and 21, now those were just resurfaced. Is that the anticipation life of that resurface, or is there something else going on there?
I can find out.
Yeah, I'd like to know what that's all.
Because it wasn't even that much for the original
Yeah,
tennis court.
so I don't know why, that's just,
I think the library's turning into tennis courts. We just don't know about it yet.
what's
It's
it
indoor.
called? Pickleball?
Pickleball. It's coming in.
and then the other question I would have, I didn't look, I didn't catch it, was we did similar work to the track, and so where would that be as in relation to the tennis courts? I know it was different, but
Sure.
how's that gonna play into any kind of
It's-
maintenance? Because the problem with those, they were so unattended for so long that we were supposedly incurring a bigger cost because we didn't really keep up with the good
Right.
maintenance of it, so I'm looking at 2021, I'm like, wow, we're gonna be putting some money in the tennis courts again, sheesh, I'd like to know,
Right.
get some answers on that.
Any questions on this from outside of those?
No, I think that, a lot of the stuff, it seems like, when I look at the stuff at AES, I think a lot of it's scheduled right now anyways, and I think it's sooner than that because it's all part of our either Green Communities grant, so a lot of that stuff is actually being redone now. And then on top of that, we have still about $100,000-something that's set aside for those repairs anyways, so
Parking lot.
however we can, parking lot, it says it's like $1 million.
Yeah, it's just, cause I was gonna ask that question, like, where does that all stand? I know that numbers ended up being higher than what were initially anticipated.
I think it's because the sidewalks with the ADA compliance is
Mhm.
really what happened with that too.
But is that in the town's plan?
I mean, I have to check with Nate exactly where, because we've got all that money set aside for it right now.
Is that an all or nothing deal, like you gotta do the whole thing at once kind of deal, is that what?
In my conversation with, like, Nate's a part of that, and I do think we need some follow-up with Nate.
Yeah.
There were some things that can be done, but there's a big price tag to, so they could do some of the sidewalk repairs, the actual curbing pieces, but there was and scheduling was gonna be a nightmare
Yep.
thing of that aspect of it. So it wasn't, because I had asked the question, can it be done in phases? You
Yeah,
know?
yeah.
He said there's a small part that could be done any point, but the lion share of it had to be all done at the same time.
Yeah, and I think the follow-up question, I know you're all over this, is at what point does it become even bigger of a safety issue at this point?
So I will say it is a top priority for Nate to sort of circle the wagons to figure out where this is. I know he's done some homework at the request of the town to say, what is the big picture here? What are we looking at? So that way Lakeville can sit there and say, all right, this is how we need to take care of it. So Nate is definitely concerned about from a safety perspective. And he has this giant spreadsheet that goes over everything. So I know it is a big priority for him. It's just more the fact of, I think he's got to come back to the towns to figure out, here's what the price tag is, here's the strategy, and then what is the ultimate
Well,
strategy?
and that $700,000 that's on here includes like creating a brand new parking lot, creating another dumpster, like it's other stuff. It's not just, that's not the cost to do the immediate repairs that.
Well,
need to be
yeah,
done.
I'm looking at
So-
what's necessary for safety first, and then
Yeah.
what needs to be
I
done
think
next.
The issue that we came across too was the timing. And that last year couldn't happen because it was supposed to be, potentially slated for the summer. Then there was some issues that it couldn't be, and then, so now it's like, when can it actually get done? And you have to look again, it's gotta wait till the summer.
Yeah, I would
Yeah.
agree with you there, but last year, I mean, weren't you even short, didn't it hit you by surprise that the cost, was it
not
even
sure. I'll
properly
have to
funded?
check.
I'm sure it probably wasn't even properly funded at that point, just because of the.
I
the
think it
cost.
was, I don't know about the funding piece, but I think it was more than what they originally
It's a
thought it was
thought,
gonna be.
right. So that makes it
Once
even
they
more
looked into
difficult.
the ADA pieces and everything else,
Yeah.
so.
Okay.
And I think by the time we got maybe the quotes or something back, it was like, there wasn't even time to do another quote to try to get just the surface paving or
Yeah.
something like that,
Yeah.
because we have to take the time. If the quote came in and it was like, oh my God, this is too much, well, now you have to start all over with the bidding process with something else. And
So can I ask from a homework assignment, since you love homework?
it's great.
Because scheduling, I think, is a big piece. We're meeting again in January. Could I have you come back with sort of just an update real quick? Just to see if
For
the
the-
district needs to,
Pavement.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
that-
just
I'll check with Nate.
just
If I
from
had
a.
my phone right now. I'd check it.
So, one question on right now, we're in year one that's on this, is about $70,000 worth of maintenance project. Is that budgeted?
Did that include the boiler too? That would-
I'm sorry?
Did that include the boiler in that 70,000 that just came up?
Let me confirm. Yes, the boiler's on there.
That's, all right.
It's in there. So this here is what Bob and I worked on for FY20 budgeting. These are the things that are coming up in this year one that we're concerned about in the immediate future that we need to,
But these items in here are not budgeted.
some of them are, some of them we've absorbed. So like the repair water booster pumps, we had to absorb that cost this year
Got it. because that
instead
was-
of doing
okay.
something else. There is a repair and maintenance budget. Some of these things will get done, some of them won't, because things such as, $16,000 came up that we needed to pay for immediately, and same thing with the hot water boiler.
Got
But
it.
the hot water boiler may not be the district's issue based on the lease agreement.
Well, anything over $5,000 that's extraordinary in capital nature could go back, or in the lease agreement should be funded by the town.
Towns, right. So Freetown, in this case, that item wouldn't be an expense of ours, although you may take in the revenue, I don't know how you're gonna
Right,
push
and that's
that.
the discussion that we have to
Yeah.
have, and Freetown's not here, so.
Right.
it's-
So, some of this stuff too, though, what's going on with you guys getting a green community grant for the district?
So we did.
Okay.
We did receive one, but it was used for a feasibility study, and that's where most of the funds went,
Okay,
if not all. I can get the exact number.
okay. Yeah, because I'm just looking at some of these things that are on this,
Mhm.
and they look like they possibly would be grant
Mhm.
worthy, green communities grant. So if you got one, then next year,
So we
maybe some
were
of this can be
denied at
grants.
first, and then they reapplied, and we did receive the grant. Bob did a feasibility study, and we have different items, and that's why they're on here. that
Okay, so
were
that's why,
brought up.
so we,
Okay.
in theory, next year can apply again to get the funding
Right.
for those items,
Right.
is what it really is. So there's definitely an option.
But those items, the problem with that though is, I don't know how this grant funding works, those items, they're identifying may need to be attended to before then.
Right.
Well, I mean, a lot of them too, where it's like parking lot lighting upgrades, like just looking at that, you've got the parking lot as it is now with the lighting, but when it's, anytime it's an upgrade, they're looking at LED. I mean, a lot of these things, it's like year 4, and it's $12,670, $15,000. Those are lighting upgrades. Those are things that grant money can cover, and that's why, like with Assawamsett, we have like $200,000 going in each year
Right.
on those energy improvement grants, and we get a lot of money that we pour right back in. So it's things like that where you kind of look at it and it's like, oh, like if half of this stuff could be under that grant.
Right.
It's almost like stuff that you don't need right now, like you'd rather prioritize the
Where
stuff
where are those lighting upgrades? Gotta be on campus here,
Grades.
because
It is.
Freetown, yeah, because Freetown's already done that.
There's a
And the
mixture
high school.
of, it's across the campus in general.
So
Yeah.
have we gotten the report back on the feasibility
Yes.
study? Okay.
That's why you said these
That's-
items are in
it's
here.
here.
Got it, okay.
Yeah, so it's not necessarily, I mean, it could be funded through grant money,
Mhm.
applying for that for next year.
New business, FY19, any,
So I've kind of done a different layout of where we stand right now, but we're on target still. I'm maintaining, working with Liz and Bob, both of the directors for facilities and also student services. You can see that we've collected around $9 million of revenue, and we have about $5 million left in the budget that we haven't encumbered yet.
Nothing, from a student services perspective that has any budget ramifications at this point?
Not to date. Liz and I are continuing to meet. There are some students that she's monitoring closely, and once we know if they're going to be going out of district, coming back, if something comes up with them, we'll report back to the committee.
Is there any cushion at all in the existing budget beyond that 125 for this year?
There was no cushion built in.
Okay, so it was based on the exacts of what you knew for
Back, and
those
that's,
students coming back in?
right, and
Yeah,
that's a
and I-
conversation we've been having with student services, and they've been providing me with a list of, this is what we budgeted at this date, and these are all the changes, pluses or minuses. So we're actually meeting this month to go over it.
I have a question. Well, one, just to back up, you must have policies from your previous district that you could probably bring for this discussion, I'm assuming. I think yeah.
For-
formulating some policies around the district.
Sure.
And that would be helpful, along with what Mitzi has. The other question I had was, and this is for this committee as well, in your practice, did you budget any contingency for special education? Because as far as I know right now, we're not. This is what we expect, and there is no contingency.
We look at the population as of
Right.
June, or
In other districts,
As the budget
it's been told to us that there's been built-in contingencies around special ed.
unwritten, we'll just leave it,
Right.
there has been some contingencies, yes. This district does not.
No.
Right.
So what's your practice been in other districts? Have you,
So, the districts I've been in, we've always budgeted for the students that are with us and what we're expecting to see in the next fiscal year. Every tuition gets increased by 2.5%, depending on what the state comes out with, as their expected inflation of the tuition cost. So this year, we're looking at 2.5% across the board in the students that we have currently.
Yes, and I think that stabilization fund is that mechanism.
I
You know what
agree,
mean? Like,
I
that's
agree,
like
but that's what I was trying to get to is.
Are we doing it
Maybe that's
anyway?
the state, maybe that's our contingency, and we look at it and say, this is our cost, if you want to get to a number around that fund, this is our cost, let's add whatever our
X percent.
contingency.
And then anything
contingency is.
over that goes into,
Well, maybe we just say, this is what we're funding for this year, this is our contingency, and as that builds, we're gonna look at this as a multi-year approach, so that may be a mechanism to say, okay, we're gonna build contingency, if we don't use it, it's gonna be in that fund.
Well, no, because that's not how that would, because if you build it into the operating budget, it goes into E&D. You're not.
No, no,
you
no,
can transfer it out of.
Well,
I'm
you
using
can't
it,
transfer out of
I'm
E&D
saying
into
this,
stabilization fund, that only comes from the towns.
no, but I'm saying this year, this is what our special ed costs were. Here's a contingency, this is what we feel.
You just need to calculate
To
the
calculate a
number
number.
for it to ask for.
Right, right.
to-
Oh,
so
okay,
it's not
I
in
see
the
what you're
budget.
saying.
Yeah, exactly, just to get us to a number that's, okay, this is how we're building this. I mean, I think we need some,
Or we just say, look, you want to get to 500, so.
yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
I mean,
it's 2 years, and this is what we need, or
Mhm.
3 years, or 4 years, or whatever.
Next item under the agenda, we talked last meeting of adding OPEB trust to the agenda for discussion purposes. I'd like to hear what the town's strategy, obviously, I say towns plural, but Freetown's not here, what's the,
You can go first.
yeah,
no, okay, you'll go, yeah, sure.
yeah, so, Mitzi, can you
Yeah, so.
give a quick overview about what the strategy for the town of Lakeville with the OPEB trust?
Yeah, so we just got our most recent valuation of our liability on OPEB. And so, other post-employment benefits, health insurance, really, and life insurance for retirees. And so, right now, we have a $12.5 million liability for the town.
Unfunded?
Unfunded liability, yes. So what, now they make you do like a kind of a variance in terms of like a 1% cost increase, healthcare cost trend increase, all this stuff. So it ranges somewhere between 10 and 14 million, roughly, in theory. It can change at a moment's notice based on the market. And I'm sure right now it's not looking so great. However, what we've been doing is we really set aside a funding plan and created a funding plan so that we could have it fully funded. What we're looking to do, I don't have the numbers, the dates right in front of me because it's on my phone, which is being used for something else right now. But what the basic premise is that we're funding a minimum, we're putting in of $230,000 a year. The problem with that is that even by putting $230,000 a year in, it's not enough to cover our normal cost and our service cost of the entire plan, so we're short about another $200,000. So but we did set it up with funding $230,000 a year and what that would look like. And then when our pension obligation is fully funded, which is going to be in 2028 or something like that, or 2030. So once our pension is fully funded, where we'd be paying about $1.something million a year in pension costs, we're turning that into funding OPEB. So that's the point where we're going to say, okay, now we're funding it a lot faster. So we start out with, we're like 3% funded, 6% funded, 9% funded, 12% funded. All of a sudden, our pension, in theory, is fully funded. And we can redirect those funds to now fund OPEB. That's our long-term plan in the town. What we're doing at this special town meeting in the fall, if the town approves it, is $400,000 into the OPEB trust right now because we were short last year. I'd love to see a similar type of approach and what could be done at the district level. I have no idea when your pension is gonna be funded, no clue, but that's the strategy that we've put in place, is that once that pension, and you're probably paying somewhere around 1 point something, you know, each year into the pension, it's probably almost $2 million, that once that's fully funded, and there is a funding mechanism and a timeline on that, and that might also be around 2030, who knows, that's the point where you start fully funding your OPEB. So we're trying to put something aside every year, knowing that the long-term plan is to flip that pension right into OPEB.
How is this OPEB on the district gonna affect your assessment?
Nothing.
Before we get to that
Oh.
point, how are you,
How do we set it all up?
exactly?
PCOT. So we're part of PCOT.
No, sorry, not the trust, not the fund itself, but how are you in the operating budget coming up with the money to put into OPEB?
That's coming through our one-time funds. That's why. So like at the fall town meeting, when we look at this and we say, okay, look, we just got additional permits, you know, building permits, things like that, one-time funding, that's what we're looking at and saying, look, we need to start funding this into our long-term liability.
So if your one-time funding falls short, you don't have the ability to fund that?
Correct. And the thing is with the OPEB trust as well, is that when you put that money in, you can take it out, if you need to. So it's going in, it's being invested, and it is specifically identified right now in the trust for health insurance. But if you ever ran into a problem where you had a funding issue in the town, it's actually able to be taken out.
So you're asking that the district fund it through its own one-time funds, essentially?
Well, the district doesn't have that ability.
Right,
So that's the
so-
thing, it's the same thing where I would say, if instead of this 125 that's in the operating budget that's set aside for somehow funding into E&D, it's another piece that we need to start talking about as a component that is part of the assessment to the towns. Because
Well, that's what I
it's-
mean, it's gonna be, that's what,
Yeah.
I'd say, how's it gonna affect your assessment? Your assessment's gonna go up,
Yeah,
it's
I
gonna be
didn't
a piece of it.
understand what you meant,
Oh,
because I was like, assessment of OPEB?
No,
I
the
was like,
assessment
what-
to you is,
Yeah.
yeah, your assessment goes up, and you've got, I mean, if that's the case and you guys are willing to fund it, I don't know what issue I could possibly have with it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's one of those things, but it's also, I guess when I bring it up is to say, you know, when you look at the entirety of what you have for a liability, it's probably about $30 million at this point. And so it's something that absolutely is going to fall on the shoulders of the towns, whether it falls today or it falls, 20 years from now. I'd rather see it fall more evenly between now and 20 years from now. So I think putting in place a funding plan, and that would include, though, looking at it and saying, hey, when our pension is fully funded, we're going to start kicking it in, putting together a funding schedule, and what do you need, and do an actuarial funding schedule of how could you get this thing fully funded. That's the mechanism by which then you put it into your budget as a line item. I mean, you only have like $5,000 in there or something each year. Maybe you had 50 and something, and maybe it's 50,000 or something. It's already in your line item, because if you didn't put a line item in there, then the bond ratings and all that other stuff don't look so
You
good.
talk about OPEB or?
Yeah, your budget has OPEB in it. It's tiny.
Do we have all of the logistics set up to make a contribution? We don't.
So-
But that's the first thing that needs to be done.
Yeah, so
If we go down this road, right, so.
you have a trust established already, I guess. We had a trust established too. But we went and talked, and I would suggest talking to the Plymouth County OPEB Trust. It's PCOT. They're the ones that we use. They do professional money management with it. They can administer the plan, do all that stuff too. So all you really have to do is just give them the contribution, and they're putting it, investing it for you, and doing all that stuff.
So I agree with Derek, and it's a rare occurrence, that I would have no issue setting up the trust and going down that. I would look to the towns to say, in the short term, what are you comfortable with from a funding perspective of that?
Well, I think what you need to do then is have whoever would do it in the district, as we did it in your actuary really, would do a funding schedule. So you can look at it and say, look, we have to deal with this funding schedule, and how much are we going to try to put aside in order to get to a status of being fully funded at some point.
The hard
The
part-
number's going to be ridiculously large
Yeah,
for you guys
exactly.
because you have a huge liability. So what you kind of have to look at is, when you think about your budget process going forward, it should become part of your budget process. And when you're looking at what are the asks and the needs and the desires, that's got to be a priority, because if it's not, then we're just really kind of destroying the budget for the towns and the district, years down the road. Because right now, you're probably paying 1.5 times maybe on the retiree health insurance to the actives. Who knows? I mean, you have a lot of retirees, and, you've got a huge population. And we're right now at almost 1-to-1 in terms of actives to retirees. But if you look and you forecast it into the future, you're going to be paying 3 times as much in health insurance in your operating budget like now for those retirees.
I'm sorry. My suggestion or my input to the committee, the full school committee and the administration would be, I'd like to see my budget and how we structure the school, and then above that, what that funding mechanism, because the last thing I want to do is, and believe me, I understand where you're coming from about the unfunded liability, but the struggle that I have had in the past, and I would continue to have, is I don't want to fund that at the risk of deteriorating any services. So I'd want to say, all right, let's level service this, and now we fund it above and beyond that. That's where I could
Well, that's
say.
right, that's
If
right,
the
the
towns were,
question. Yeah.
if that made sense to the towns, I'd say fine, but if it was, okay, here's your budget, but you gotta reduce it by this funding schedule, I'd be like, wow, we're gonna put some services at risk,
No,
so.
it's not that. It's really just like what you do with everything else, is you've got to look at every single piece, including your capital needs, and you've got to look at your long-term debt. I mean, so when the school roof is done being paid for in 2024, whenever
Yeah,
it's done,
no,
which is
I
pretty soon,
get that.
looking at that and saying, do we want to incur more debt, or are we going to take some of that money and say, look, we were paying this into debt, we're going to pay it into different debt now, and instead, maybe we do these other repairs where now our debt service is, instead of it being $400,000 a year, it's 200, and that other 200 we're setting aside and saying it's going to OPEB.
I think that's a great suggestion.
It's trying to, look at that debt schedule, because this is a long-term liability, and just managing all of those things, your capital, your debt, and your operating.
I think it's a great suggestion, it has to flow into the totality of the budget.
Exactly, and it's a
so.
long-term plan. So it's,
Okay, very
once
long-term.
if you decide to join PCOT or any of the other, trusts, you're gonna get the you already have the actuarial evaluations required anyways, but just to ask what the funding plan could look like, and we just ask, and we say, hey, if we put in $100,000 a year, how long until we're fully funded, and when our pension's fully funded, we flip it. And that's kind of a big component, so you can at least have a plan in place that you can try to follow, and again, if you put the money in, and lo and behold, you need it, you can raid OPEB. It's not ideal, but it's something that PCOT allows you to take the money back out at that point.
Do we have any opinion from our accountants? Have they ever made any recommendation or anything in our audits on OPEB?
I'll take a look. I'm not sure.
It's, the actual reporting of OPEB liabilities is new for this past year, so they would be very well aware of it, but if you talk to them, they can tell you all about it.
Yeah, but I'd like to know if they're gonna make any suggestions and say, hey, you know what, you folks should really.
So why don't we do this I think we're in agreement that if it's over and above what our budget to run the schools, I don't think there's any objection. But, we'd have to open up to the full school committee. But I'd like to see if there's some homework that the administration can do, both from a funding schedule, as well as what the auditor's recommendation would be.
I'd like to see, on top of that, to Mitzi's point, I wouldn't mind seeing a budget, in the budget that way, if that's what the towns are so inclined to do. Let's put a placeholder in there. We have to we're coming up on giving some
Exactly.
recommendations. That
Yep.
may be one of the things, hey, let's look at putting this placeholder in place.
And the other thing too is, if the state comes in again next year and says, hey, guess what, you've got, now this is where you have to kind of play with it, but if the state says, here's another 300,000 that you didn't expect, and we've set aside money into your stabilization, now the question is gonna be, are you gonna let it just sit there in E&D, or are you gonna say, look, I do wanna fund some of these long-term liabilities? And
Well-
that's where you have your number, and if you're at that number and you say, look, and again, it's policies, and just trying to, what's the overall long-term goal for funding this district?
And quite frankly, I think that's a conversation that I know Derek and I have had many of, that we'd love to have that conversation of saying, hey, we now have $1 million in E&D. We're comfortable bringing it down to 7. What do we do with that 300 as far as either capital, either long-term debt, or what have you?
Yeah.
We just have never have been able to have that conversation because of the fact that any residual has been been borrowed to pay Paul.
Yeah, and
So-
I think, I hate to put the plug in for marijuana, as I always do, but only because if that funding comes to us and as it's gonna go in certain ways to Freetown, that we will be much better off as a community with more funding and available funds to be able to do things like that with that money in the towns.
Yeah, I don't know what
And that's-
Freetown's doing with their.
Yeah, they're
money.
not adult use recreational, but they're doing the giant cultivation.
Yeah.
So they will have some revenue coming in from that, and that's actually a 1,000,000-square-foot facility.
Yeah, I
that
think
really goes in. got
that
kind of-
revenue goes in stages, so I think they start out, I think they max out, I wanna say
Well,
$500,000 of
Yes, the
revenue.
problem with their revenue in that, which is probably fine because they can use it somewhere else, is that's gotta be mitigation money against the effects of having a cultivation facility there.
Yeah, it's not enough, it's not
Whereas
much,
if
right.
we're retail, which we have right now until we see what happens at the next town meeting, because if this gets defeated at the next town meeting, my sunny outlook on budget is going to change dramatically going forward, so.
So, beyond the scope for this one, this meeting, so I think it makes sense that part of our recommendation would be is, let's make sure that there is a line item placeholder for these two, even if it's zero in our FY '20 budget.
It's
We'll
there.
at least have
It's like $5,000, right?
1,000,
It's $5,000.
whatever that is. But then I think at our next meeting, we can sit there and strategize, and sit there and, let's plan $100,000 over on top of what, if it's the same strategy we did the 125,
What-
right? So,
Yeah, because it's talking about policies.
Yep.
So if we say again, look, let's start talking about what do you want to see in these items and brainstorm each one. So here's stabilization, here's special ed,
Yep.
stabilization, or E&D and stabilization. Then you look at it and say, how are you going to fund OPEB? How are you going to fund your long-term liabilities? How are you going to fund your capital? I think those are the three or four things that if we sit here and talk about them and create policies as this committee, then that gives that longer-term plan.
Yeah, the operations are the operations, let's face it.
Exactly. You
I
do
mean,
what you want
so-
with the operations. The concern is always, how do we take the one-time things that come in and how are we best using those? And how are we making sure that they're not getting sucked into operations because that muddies.
Yeah, that's why I think we're doing here, is we're trying to isolate all that, which
Yeah.
would make it a lot clearer for everybody.
Yep.
so Ashley, you have like the homework assignments for OPEB as far as following up with the auditor, what have you? Okay.
As far as OPEB goes, to Mitzi's point though, I like the, looking at the debt schedule and seeing how that may play in. So that may be, it may be zero this year or whatever it is, but maybe in that year 2 or 3 when the debt schedule changes, I'm not saying we take all the debt money and fund it, but it may be a mechanism that we
Well,
do that way.
remember, we fund the debt. So that's the thing is like.
Yeah, I get it.
Meaning-
Don't put on more debt.
Well,
Use
no,
it.
it's not that. It's, when you look at it and you say, okay, like, you can't use that money for anything else. That's what I'm saying, is like,
Yeah,
the debt
no.
goes away, it's the towns who are gonna say,
Yeah.
what are we gonna do with this? So think about it from that perspective of the, like, if you put it on there and we're buying into it already, that's how you're funding, this is the debt, which
Yeah.
is debt, but it's also now.
Assuming we don't
part-
need a new roof, right, Mitzi, or something
I
like
hope not,
that. So-
but, it happens.
So just to dumb it down to my level, we're gonna get an auditor's opinion. We're gonna look at a funding schedule, and then we have a placeholder within our, I know we have it now, but subject to change based upon some future information that we can sort of plug in at a later date.
Yeah, and if you have the funding schedule in your pension plan too, just at least when you're gonna be fully funded on that, because that's a huge trigger, at least for our OPEB funding, and that is contained within your own operating budget, so that's what,
So I think I would say I speak for the full school committee on this point, and Derek, correct me if I'm wrong, or George, right?
I'll take it.
Yeah, as long as this is not a means to reduce other services, I think we would be on board on that aspect of it. I just want to make sure that we're clear on that.
But I think, yeah, if we had that policy, to Mitzi's point, we wouldn't be reducing services. We would
Right.
just be having it as part of a budget that was more like overhead.
right, and that's exactly how we look at it with the fall town meeting stuff, is here's all this one-time stuff that's come in. We know the minute you put one-time money into the operating budget, you're in trouble. So that's why we don't do it, and that's why we look at it and say, okay, well, what are we gonna do with it? And we have all these other liabilities that then eventually will reduce the operating budget, so you can use it for other things.
Yeah, we need Freetown as part of this discussion, so, to find out what their thought process is
That was
on
a
all.
special town meeting, I mean, a joint town meeting.
Ooh, that's not on the agenda
Sorry,
here.
Freetown.
Yeah. Any other business that anybody wants to bring up or add to a future?
So we're not meeting in December.
No, so, which,
Merry Christmas.
Should we
That's-
meet in
that's-
December?
well,
Just
that's
to
the
talk
question,
about-
right? So last time, we didn't have a quorum because there was so many meetings, so many other commitments and that.
Yeah.
So which is why I did not schedule one in December. I'm happy to try and put one on the schedule. I think, quite frankly, I think where we have the discussions the last two meetings, I think have been actually great as far as the progress, and I think that we have some homework that I see no objection waiting till January 17th, but I'll open it up to everybody if they want to meet in December.
I mean, I'd rather, only because once we get to January, we're like turning a corner on budget seasons. You guys are in budget season. Like, if we can do this stuff before we get to budget season, it helps to at least set a framework.
The only thing with December, I would suggest that, I don't have a problem, but it'd have to be early, because once you start getting deeper in
Yeah,
That's what I
December,
mean, is like if you do it the first Thursday
it's gotta
in
be,
December,
because
and that's it.
everybody's
Yeah, nothing
schedule
else.
after that is just gonna be a mess.
I will, let me just,
I don't know what day it is, but.
But we're gonna have some clear objectives, I mean, let's, if we're gonna have a December meeting, let's have an objective,
I-
what we wanna see accomplished out of
I'd love
that.
to have the outline of the policies.
The outline of policy, us outline policies in that meeting?
Yeah, so we brainstorm and get all the policy, like, information. We say, hey, this is what we want for these policies, and we talk about each one.
Okay,
Your
so
E&D, your
ahead of that meeting,
stabilization.
could you share your policies with the committee, and
Yeah.
can you share your policies
I'll
so we
send
can
them.
look at that?
I'll send them. I mean,
That
I
way,
think
we're not spending all that time, we could be fast tracking the meeting.
Yeah, no, just remember, our policies are gonna be.
Yeah.
It's just a, like, a lot of stuff doesn't apply
Yep.
to you guys, but
Yep.
at least it's like.
It's gonna make my
framework
reading
by
a
which
lot
you can see
quicker.
it. Yeah.
so the first Thursday in December is December 6th.
Okay.
That would be the best way.
Is that, are we okay with doing that Thursday, December 6th?
Yes.
Yeah, any homework that we could do ahead of time, I would like to do, you know, like, if Mitzi's saying they are objectives to policies, which I don't disagree with,
Yeah,
I'd like
we-
to see.
We put our own bullet points. or
Yeah, and
something.
I'd like to see something that says, all right, let's go, let's hammer this, let's get something done.
So maybe if like we can have, like, I don't know if Ashley, you can send out just like, here's like these are the bullet points, like,
Yeah.
be prepared to talk about,
Yeah.
like, what you believe your policy, or what you want to see in policies for the four items we talked about. It's OPEB funding.
Yep.
It's E&D levels. it's
We've already got some
stabilization
soft
funding.
formulation of it, really.
I think it's not going to take very long.
No, so,
You know?
Mitzi, what do you think of the four? OPEB, E&D,
OPEB,
capital?
E&D, capital, and stabilization, special ed stabilization. It's kind of a combo with E&D.
yeah, I was just gonna say, it's, that's one
But
and the
they're two
same.
different things, because funding is different, and how they get funded is different.
Okay. There, that should not be a problem, right, Ashley? Yeah, and we can figure out from an agenda perspective. All right, so next meeting will be December 6th at 6:30.
With the goal that there's gonna be 4 policies coming out to be reviewed by the school committee then.
Yeah, so I think if we all bring like our bullet point lists of what we want to have, and then we just talk through them, and then we just create them. I think that's,
Steve, I'm
'Cause-
traveling that week, so I will not be here, but
So we'll expect that you'll have your stuff in ahead of time.
absolutely.
20-page report.
Yeah, no worries.
Double
PowerPoint,
spaced.
everything.
Yeah.
yeah, and I
everything.
think that as long as we can get, although it doesn't really matter if it's before or at the meeting, but if we have, you know, you've got the funding schedule from the actuaries on OPEB and what that looks like, because.
That's gonna throw us off the chair anyway.
Yeah, and I don't know
So-
when your last valuation was. They're like every 3 years, so I'm not sure what it looks like. But yeah, once you see that, and here's your $30 million liability, it's like, and it's gonna go in your balance sheet this year. So it's like, it's a real thing that people seem to think doesn't exist, but it does.
And obviously, just to, the process would be, we would recommend to the policy committee, the school committee, and then there's a policy process between a first reading and then a full approval, so.
Yeah, so these would be the policy recommendations coming from the regional finance subcommittee.
Exactly, right,
Yep.
and it has to be 3 meetings with that,
Yeah,
so, but with that being.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the time frame of that, that's gonna put you out a little ways.
Exactly,
you know,
right, so it's obviously gonna be, well, we're in the midst of the budget season if our goal is for the next meeting to do.
Yeah, but it could, even though the policy's not there, there'll be discussion around it for
Exactly,
the
yeah.
budget, so that's
And
fine.
that's why the placeholders, I think, were.
Right, so that's fine.
Okay. Motion to adjourn,
Second.
all in favor?
aye.
I-
Thanks, guys.